Hello and welcome to our little presentation of a very interesting DNA study. The title of the study we will look at today is known as Genomic Insights into the Population History of the Resande or Swedish Travelers. Interestingly enough, this study is actually the first study of its kind to look into the origins and demographic history of this particular Scandinavian ethnic group. And it is freely available to download in PDF format. So, without any further delay, let us have a look at the study. In the summary part, there is an indirect proposition for a connection between this Scandinavian group and Romani groups in general, which is a premise that pretty much defines this study as a whole. In the same summary we also see a listing of the major findings of the study. However, before we take a look at the actual findings of the study, we should get acquainted with the basic parameters of the study itself. In terms of wording, the study mostly uses the term Resande when talking about the target group of the study, a term that directly translates to traveler in English. However, they also mention other terms in the study, such as Resandefolket and Swedish traveler. When it comes to the Iberian Romani samples that are included in the study, they mostly use Romani, but also Roma. However, we will in this video use the terms Scandinavian Romani and Iberian Romani to distinguish between these main groups. All other groups in the video will simply be named according to their listed country of origin, such as Swedish and so on. Furthermore, when it comes to sample size of the two main groups, we can see that the study samples consist of 9 Resande, or Scandinavian Romani samples, and 66 Iberian Romani samples. So what can we say about these samples? Well, the elephant in the room is obviously the tiny sample size, which is not at all insignificant, but is actually a huge problem for the study as a whole. Although the small size alone probably won't impact the main findings of the study, at least not in a radical way, it nonetheless restricts the study in a number of ways. Moreover, we also reacted negatively to their usage of Iberian Romani groups as a representation for Romani groups in general. Which doesn't make any sense, neither from a historical or from a geographical viewpoint. Taken together, these two issues do limit the study from reaching its full potential. That being said, the study itself does acknowledge these issues, so there is at least some hope with regard to future research on the subject. So, now that we have had a look at the technical aspect of the study, let us then move on to the study findings themselves. As we briefly mentioned earlier, there is an indirect proposition in this study for an ancestral connection between the Scandinavian Romani and Romani groups in general. A proposition that manifests into what we can call an overarching question, where they use several different methods to explore whether or not there is any shared Romani-related ancestry linking the Scandinavian and Iberian Romani groups? The short answer to this question is that the study does confirm shared Romani-related ancestry between these groups. Ancestry that can be broken down into different components that reflect the Romani diaspora. In other words, the study shows that the Scandinavian and Iberian groups both descend from peoples who migrated from South Asia to West Asia and into Europe through the Balkans. Furthermore, the study goes on to show that this Romani-related ancestry account for around 17%, on average, of the total ancestry that is found within the Scandinavian Romani samples. At the same time, the study also found that a majority of around 79% of their ancestry is North European in origin. With the exception of this Romani ancestry, the prevalence of mostly Northern European ancestry among the Scandinavian Romani samples has led the study to conclude that they are overall fairly similar to the Swedish samples. This is all very interesting, and we are, as one would expect, very glad to see that DNA studies have started to view Romani ancestry as something more than just South Asian DNA, and in that regard this study is an improvement to celebrate. That being said, we are less impressed with their ancestral breakdown, as the percentage of shared ancestry between the Scandinavian and Iberian Romani is perhaps not the best indicator of actual Romani ancestry, because the Iberian Romani are not a very good proxy for the actual Romani ancestry that the Scandinavian Romani carry within them. So we think that, had the study instead used Northern European Romani groups as proxies for the Romani ancestry that is found within the Scandinavian Romani, they might very well have found some Romani ancestry within the remaining 79% too, ancestry that could potentially connect the Scandinavian Romani to other Romani groups in Northern Europe, such as the Sinti in Germany. But that would require them to expand their definition of the Romani diaspora, to include the many migrations that occurred after the initial entry into the Balkans from Anatolia. Anyway, let us get back to the study. As we mentioned before, the study approaches the question of Romani-related ancestry from many different angles, and one of these is to focus on what is commonly known as direct paternal lines, which is basically ancestry that is exclusively inherited from father to son. When the study looked at the paternal lines of the Scandinavian Romani, they found that this part of their ancestry is somewhat similar to the rest of their ancestry, as most of the paternal lines are related to paternal lines that are found in the Swedish samples. Some of the paternal lines can however be traced to the Caucasus region, and were by the study, therefore connected with the Romani diaspora. So in other words, a minority of the father-to-son lines were traced back to West Asia, while most of the lines found amongst the Scandinavian Romani are similar to lines that are found in Swedes in general. When it came to direct maternal lines, which is ancestry that is almost exclusively inherited from mother to daughter, the study found that the Scandinavian Romani samples carry maternal lines that are frequently found in Northern European populations. Although it should be mentioned that with regard to both the maternal and paternal lines, the study again reiterates the limitations placed upon it due to the small sample size. We found this part of the study very interesting, although we were not surprised to see that the paternal lines mirrored the other parts of their ancestry. We would very much like to see more research on this part of their ancestry, but let us again return to the study findings. So, while most of the study is as one would expect, namely text-based, the study does also have a visual side to it, and one of these visual tools is a form of simplified historical timeline, where they have tried to place the study findings within a historical setting. Something that is probably done in order to give a plausible explanation for the findings, by binding them to known historical events. More importantly, however, is to note that this simple, yet very informative visual timeline, is built upon findings from the study. Findings that has shown us that a group of Romani and a group of Northern Europeans had children together, and that this event is said to have happened within a time period stretching from the year 1739 to the year 1865. An event that resulted in children who, we are told, are the ancestors of contemporary Scandinavian Romani. Based on this information, the study then goes on to suggest that these Romani ancestors could have belonged to a group of Romani that arrived in Scandinavia during the 17th century. An event that is visualized as pinkish-brown in the above-featured timeline. However, they also present a few alternative interpretations of the findings, such as proposing that this Romani ancestry might exclusively be traced back to a Romani group that made their way into Scandinavia more than 500 years ago. A historical event that is visualized in pink on the timeline. Or, even that such ancestry might actually stem from several distinct Romani groups that migrated into Scandinavia at different times in history. With regard to these findings and the overall chosen wording of the study, we get the impression that they are actually suggesting that contemporary Scandinavian Romani might actually not be descendants of a Romani group that were first recorded in Sweden, now over 500 years ago, but might instead be descendants of a Romani group that migrated into Scandinavia more than 100 years later, during the first half of the 17th century. With this in mind then, it is fairly safe to say that the historical picture that the study paints was for us a surprise, as we naturally anticipated a union of two such groups to have happened in the first half of the 1500s, thereby coinciding with the first certain, recorded presence of Romani in Sweden. An event that, as we have seen, is shown in the featured timeline in the study. With this in mind, it seems to us that there is a need for a follow-up study. A future study that could examine any possible difference between the Scandinavian Romani subgroups of Sweden, as well as other subgroups that are found in Norway. In this regard, it might also be interesting to include descendants of the Rodi speakers from Norway, which is a unique population that seems to have a lot in common with the Scandinavian Romani. Anyways, Let us now look at the last part of our featured findings, before we summarize the study. With regard to genetic variation, the study found that the Scandinavian Romani had less variation during certain periods in the past, but that the variation had started to increase during the 17th century, an important trend that has continued into our own time. Moreover, the study also mentions that the Scandinavian Romani were more likely, than the Swedish samples, to have children with members of their own group, but less so than the Iberian Romani samples. What these findings essentially tell us is that the Romani ancestors who migrated to Scandinavia were originally very few in numbers, but as soon as they started to have children with a local population, their numbers grew steadily and has continued to grow into our time. So, dear viewer, now that we have had a look at the study, we can go on to summarize its findings. To that effect, we can start by stating that the study does indeed confirm that the Scandinavian Romani are the descendants of a Romani population, but that most of their current ancestry was inherited from a Northern European population. This current ancestral mixture came about when a Romani group and a Northern European group fostered children together, and is said to have happened sometime between the year 1739 and the year 1865. Moreover, while some Scandinavian Romani also happen to carry paternal lineages that directly connects them to the legendary medieval-era Romani migrations through West Asia, the majority of Scandinavian Romani appear to carry common Northern European paternal lineages. While all the direct maternal lineages, on the other hand, were of common Northern European lineages. Lastly, we can mention that it was shown that the Scandinavian Romani are more genetically similar to each other than the Swedes are to each other, but less so than the Iberian Romani. So, there you have it, our humble walkthrough has come to an end. But before you go, please bear in mind that this is only our own understanding of the study, and we recommend that everyone read the study for themselves, so as to get a better understanding of the study findings. Lastly, we would like to apologize if we have in any way misrepresented or left out any crucial parts of the study. It was not our intention to do so. For details regarding the study in question, please see the description box under the video. Thank you for watching. My name is Ava and I hope that you enjoyed our little video.